Broadcasting live from the Temple of the Dragon Queen on the plain of Kryn, this is Tap Tap Concede. Welcome everybody to Tap Tap Concede. My name is Graham and joining me is Cameron.
Hello.
And special guest this week, Shivam.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm always happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Shivam is here to talk to us about more Dungeons and Dragons and how it relates to Magic the Gathering in the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set, even though apparently the Temple of the Dragon Queen is from a different plane that was not the Forgotten Realms, but now there is maybe one on the Forgotten Realms. We'll get to that. But before we do, we'll remind you that this show is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Please check out cardkingdom.com/LRR. We appreciate you doing so. We like working with them and we'd like to keep on doing that. Buy your cards there. And if you tell them loading ready run sent me button, please, they'll give you a little 1-inch button, which so far still says big oof, but who knows when that might change. And of course, this show and everything we do is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon at patreon.com/loading ready run. So in the first part of this two-part sort of mini series, we had Jeremy Petter joining us to talk about sort of our early memories of D&D and a bunch of stuff from D&D and how it was related to the cards in the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms Magic the Gathering set.
Boy, that's a name.
It's a real mouthful. And this week we have, as I said, Shivam Bhatt, who hosts his own magic podcast, by the way, Casual Magic with Shivam, which you should check out.
Every Tuesday.
And he's here to tell us more stuff. You know what? Let's just get this one out of the way, because you mentioned the Temple of the Dragon Queen from the plane of Kryn, which is, you said, the plane from Dragonlance.
Look at the way you're saying that as if you don't know what Dragonlance is.
Well, now to be fair, you know more about Dragonlance than even the woman who writes Dragonlance.
Yes. I mean, I feel like I've mentioned this on your show before, but yeah, Dragonlance is my forever home. It's my heart and soul. And because of who I am, I'm also the continuity, I guess, like canon priest when it comes to Dragonlance, in terms of whenever official people want to talk about it or ask questions about it, I am the person that they will ping to confirm that they know what they're talking about. Which means periodically on Twitter, Margaret Weiss will send me a message saying, "Hey, Shivam, this dude is asking about when Raceland's eye color changed." And I'm like, okay, well, it was in 342 after the blah, blah. And that is my superpower. Like, the reason I'm in Magic is because Dragonlance died and I had to find something to fill the hole in my heart, so I came back to card games. But yeah, so the Temple of the Dragon Queen, boy, this card makes me so happy and miserable at the same time. So I'm not really familiar with what its role in Faerun is, which is the plane of Forgotten Realms. However, what I love about this card, and on my show, I was talking to James Wyatt, who is a creative lead for this set, and he's also a senior D&D designer. He was a senior Magic designer. He was the guy who did all the plane shift supplements for D&D, for Magic, where you could sit there and like run an adventure in Zendikar, run an adventure in Kaladesh. He did all of those modules. Like, he was like, I'm a D&D player and writer. I know how to translate this into D&D, so I'm just going to do this on my own. And he did, and those are all wonderful supplements. A lot of them became the art books that we got. And so he was the lead of this, and he's a good friend of mine. And I had him on my show, and we were talking about this stuff. And he was like, yeah, look, some of these things were absolutely from Faerun. Some of these things are like very much staples of Forgotten Realms. Things like Drizzt or Icing Death. Some of these are more generic D&D references, things that show up in like the broader scope of the game, like you talked about last week. And some of, like, for instance, the Hall of the Storm Giants. I don't know if you know that, but one of the most famous D&D adventure series ever was the Storm Giants series. There was a whole module series called the Hall of the Storm Giants that went through and took you through all of these amazing adventures. Now I'm going to be like angry until I find it. I'm digging through my module box right now as I'm looking here.
Like through physical books?
Physical paper modules, because I've got the whole everything, because I'm that guy. Whatever it is, someone in the listener, someone in the comments can sit there and remind me where I've lost track of my life. Oh yeah, the GDQ. That's what it was. There was the GDQ module series, which started off with, Setting of the Hill Giant, Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl, Descent into the Depths of the Earth, etc., etc. And this mega module series, it was a 6-module series that came out in the 70s. And it ended up with this mega module called the Queen of the Demon Web Pits, where a character named Lolth showed up as the drow queen, that after going through all these frost giants and fighting all these things, and then going deep into the Underdark, and then finding the drow, and then finding the queen of the drow and all all of her Drider minions, and that is one of the most famous D&D module sets ever. So when you've got like this land, the Hall of the Storm Giants, that's not necessarily Forgotten Realms, but that is like lore of D&D, deep lore. And so when we talk about that, when I look at Temple of the Dragon Queen, the first thing my Dragonlance head sees is that in Dragonlance, which is a different world that was created for D&D. It's a different campaign setting for those of you who don't know. It has like 250 books written about it and a bunch of modules. And the principal premise is the gods have disappeared. The heroes have to go find the gods, bring them back because the evil Dragon Queen, who is the lead goddess of evil, has come back, brought her minions, brought the dragons back, and is about to try to take over the world. And you fight her in the fallen, corrupted Temple of Ishtar, which used to be the high temple of the gods of good, has been now turned into the Temple of the Dragon Queen. And it's there where her and her 5 dragon minions come. Like, the 5 colors of dragons, the dragon armies, and the heroes go and fight an epic battle. And so when I see it here, and I'm like, yes, one of the greatest locations in history of D&D has showed up to be a pseudo bad tap land that gives you 1 color and not even all 5. Come on, man. Like, really? I get it. Limited, you have to make things work for limited, but this is one of the most iconic things, and you done me dirty. It makes me real sad.
Mechanically, I've actually come around on this card in draft, but
Oh, it's
I
very,
see
very
what you're
good. I'm
saying.
sure it's fine, but it's not the Temple of the Dragon Queen. It's
Right.
a Temple of the Dragon Queen. Maybe it's like the Temple of the Dragon Queen down the street, like by the bodega. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go buy some chips and then I'll drop an offering over at the Temple of the Dragon. This is not like the Grand Lords of the Dragons have come here to fight the demons at the Temple of the Dragon. No, there's no echoing following this one.
This is like the franchised version, right? Temple of the Dragon Queen by Tiamat.
Right, exactly. It's like that's exactly what it is. It is the franchise.
Is this a franchise Temple of the Dragon Queen or a corporate location?
Yeah, this is one of the ones which is like, under new management, or like it's like we only have $20 in the offering bin, that sort of thing. But yeah. So the Temple of the Dragon Queen, though, it's a gorgeous piece of art. But I guess that does lead right into the card that made me the most excited about this set.
Yeah.
Which was Tiamat herself showing up. Tiamat, of course, the 7/7 Elder Dragon, well, not Elder, but should have been Elder, Dragon God that cost 7. I love that synergy right there. And when she comes into play, she searches for 5 dragons with different names, not named Tiamat, that you can then put into your hand. And the reason they're 5 dragons of different names is because the idea here is that you're going to go and get one of each of the chromatic dragons, right? Like, I don't know, did you guys talk about dragons last week?
We touched on the fact that the chromatic dragons, i.e. the ones that have colored names like red dragon or green dragon, are generally speaking evil.
Yes.
And the metallic dragons like gold or silver or
gold, silver, bronze, brass, and copper,
yeah, are generally speaking good.
Yes.
And I infer from what you said earlier this episode, that's about all we touched on, and I infer from what you said a couple of minutes ago that Tiamat has a cadre of 5 chromatic dragons.
So here's the thing. Tiamat is the mother of dragons. She is the goddess of the dragons. She is the chromatic dragon herself, in the sense that she is sort of like a hydra. She's a dragon with 5 heads, one of each of the dragon types. Each of them has a breath weapon associated with it, like, frost, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go down the list. And she doesn't necessarily have a cadre of 5 dragons. I mean, she does, because she's always got her lead dragons of each of the hosts with her. But she also, in Dragonlance, for instance, has the dragon armies, the red dragon army, the green dragon army, so forth, that are basically huge armies of like soldiers and evil beings and demons, and, well, not demons, but like dragons and draconians and ogres, and they're all like organized per the personalities and nature of the color of each of the dragons. So green dragons are cunning and shifty and like full of just like absolute like subterfuge and spy. Red dragons are just very much in your face, burn you until you're not there. Frost dragons are cowardly and slow but will freeze you, etc., etc. So like her gimmick is, I am bringing my host to fight you. And the fact that she does that is so perfectly flavorful. Like, she is 100% a win for me. I absolutely adore Tiamat in this set.
Nice.
Now, what made me sad initially was that her counterpart, the Platinum Dragon, the father of the dragons, the gods of good, Bahamut, is also in this set, but he's not as cool. Like, I was hoping we would get an awesome colorless legendary dragon or something like that, but then they only give us 1 gold dragon, so it's not even like you can bring all the good ones. But if you look at that card, Grandmaster of Flowers.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, I have. Grandmaster of Flowers is awesome because it is jumping off point for so many stories. So when we look at here, first we've got this young, beautiful dude with a great fly haircut, and his name is Grandmaster of Flowers, but legendary type Bahamut. So all of those who came from the olden days are sitting there looking at this like, wait, what do you mean Bahamut's a young man wandering Faerun? This, for those of you who are also canonically aware, is a brand new development. This is not from the realms. This is not from Orith. This is not from Kryn. This is James Wyatt saying, hey, you know what? Bahamut's whole principle as a character, he's the god of good in Dragonlance. He's also like just the god of good dragons. And he wanders around the prime material plane, helping people, being lawful, being good, being holy. And he wanders around with 7 canaries. These 7 canaries that you can see here in the artwork are the adult, like they're like ancient gold dragons that hang out with him. They're his host of golds that do whatever his bidding are, but they polymorph themselves into canaries so that he can walk around innocently and nobody's wondering who this weirdo with giant dragon are.
Wow, so those are all gold dragons.
Yeah, so those are all transformed into gold dragons.
Woof.
And it's like, I was like, okay, fine, I can buy that. Like the character Fizzban that you might know, he's like the one of the famous Dragonlance characters. He is Paladine or Bahamut walking around on the plane, but they're like, we didn't necessarily want it to be so Dragonlance-y or so iconically identifiable. They still wanted Bahamut in there though. So they were like, okay, well, let's put him in here. And when you look at this, he helps people. He makes it so that you can't block. You can search for monks that will come and build him up, and I'll get to why they're monks in a second. But when he gets 7 or more counters on him, he becomes a 7/7 indestructible dragon god, right? So that's Bahamut saying like, all right, I've woken up. You've angered the wrong man. It takes me a while to get angry, but here I am, and you're going to lose. So Grandmaster of Flowers. Do you know why he's called that?
So I looked this up because I was confused about and kind of fascinated about why someone named the Grandmaster of Flowers had the subtype Bahamut. And from what my cursory Googling tells me that the Grandmaster of Flowers is a title given to the senior-most monk at, double checking here, the Monastery of the Yellow Rose.
There's no specific monastery necessarily, but so one of the gimmicks of first edition D&D, of first edition AD&D rather, is that, you're familiar with D&D, obviously we talked about it last week. You have levels, right, with your character, with your classes. And one of the conceits of the first edition was that each level you had came with a title. And so you would, like, for instance, if you're a thief, your level 1 title is like Apprentice Rogue. Like, and up there you get to like, chicanery and like all these other weird like titles and stuff. When you're finally level 11, you become a thief. But each of these books, each of these classes rather, had like titles associated with them. Sometimes it got a little weird, like a 6th level cleric became a llama, and you're like, a llama, really? But like one a llama, not 2 a llama. And so the thing is that monks had all of these really cool titles that were very memorable if you were very old. And the highest level monk, the 18th level monk, was a dude named the Grandmaster of Flowers. So the deal is that once you get to about a level 11, there's only 1 monk of each level allowed after that. So in order to become like a higher level monk, you have to beat the last monk who had that title in hand-to-hand combat. And so there's only like, and the other monks were things like, monk of the North Star, monk of the, let me pull up the actual list here because I'm pulling my first edition player's handbook out. Always keep them handy, guys. You never know when you're going to need your first edition player's handbook. But yeah, like around level 8, there's the Master of Dragons and Master of the North Wind, West Wind, South Wind, then Master of the Seasons, winter, autumn, summer, and spring, and then the Grand Master of Flowers at level 18. So you had to go find this monk wherever they were in your world, beat them hand-to-hand combat, and then you would get to have that role. And if you didn't, you were stuck at level 17 or 16 or 11 or whatever it is. And you can't go higher until you find that dude and beat him. And Gygax basically made it real hard and like wanted you to work for getting your levels. And I thought that was really neat. But what they did here is basically they're saying that Bahamut is wandering around Faerun, but he is pretending to be the highest level monk. And you're like, well, why is he a monk? And that is a brand new innovation. We don't know why he's a monk. We don't know why he's a Grandmaster of Flowers, but he has an order of dragon monks that comes after him. And that's what he does. He's just like monkeying around and having a good time.
That was terrible. So this is like a new development in the Forgotten Realms story.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like there's a book coming out. The next book they announced for D&D was the Fizzban's Guide to Dragons or something around those lines. And James Wyatt worked on that book right after finishing working on AFR. So he went and took the monk that we have in AFR, which is the Dragon's Disciple, the human monk 1/3 that like gets better when you have dragons, and turned that into a class so that now you can be a Dragon's Disciple of Bahamut to thus give a canonical weight to the Platinum Dragon being a monk.
Cool. So that like a separate class than monk?
Well, it's like a monk's kit or like prestige class, or I don't know what they call them in 5th edition.
Right. Cool.
So I was like, oh, that's really, really cool. But yeah, like those two characters being in here were basically my like line of, is this set going to be good or not? Because without them, I would have been really, really unhappy. I don't know, man. This set has so many legends. Did you know that 4 legends who are in charge of the commander decks are a party? They're a full party that does adventures.
I didn't know that, but I did know, because when I was researching stuff for for revealing the Draconic Rage deck that we did the reveal video for, I realized that because there's 3 legendary creatures in the deck, and 2 of them are sort of known. Like one of them is Klauth, who's like one of the oldest and most particularly evil dragons, and Wolfgar of Icewind Dale, who is a known character as well. But that Vrondus, the sort of the face commander, is a totally new character, and I assumed that was a similar pattern for the other decks, but I didn't actually research it.
Yeah, it was like they decided they wanted to kind of give this conceit of having a party that would be able to go and adventure together. And I was like, that's really clever. I appreciate that. I mean, you guys talked about last week how the legends in the set itself are also a party, because they all like Eliwick, and well, Eliwick shows up there with the party, but also like folks like what is the white end guy? Nadar? Yeah, Nadar, Selfless Paladin.
Nadar, Eliwick, Hama Pashar, and Varys, yes. I think I might have misspoke and said that it was Gretchen Titchwilla, but no, it's Eliwick.
I mean, halflings, right? But I think actually Eliwick's a gnome, so maybe she's not a halfling. But
yeah,
suffice to say, though, yeah, like they're all a party, and they all show up in the You Do a Blah, which is fantastic. But you talked about that last week, so I'm not going to waste your time, because God, this set is so cool. This set is so cool. Let me start with one right off the top, just the very beginning of the set here. Asarak the Archlich, like, who is one of the coolest cards, because you can basically infinitely delve into dungeons in a combo of him and Rooftop Storm. Because, like, he comes into play, delves into a dungeon, you bounce it back to your hand. Rooftop Storm lets you play him for free forever and ever and ever. Amen. As long as you don't beat his dungeon, you can just keep going through the dungeons forever.
I'm gonna cede to your pronunciation on that now, because it's been bugging me.
Well, look, there are 2 R's in this name, Asarak, right? However, since 1978, literally nobody has pronounced that second one, because screw you, Gary Gygax. Why did you do this to us? We're just calling him Asarak, and that's just going to be what it is. I'm sure that somebody out there, Grognard, is sitting there thumping his Temple of Elemental Evil at me, and God bless. So our dear Archlich here shows up for the first time in one of the greatest modules of all time. One of the most famous, well, not greatest, it's actually awful, but it's like the most famous module ever, Tomb of Horrors from 1978. Which is basically Gary Gygax made both as a tournament module for, like, back when they had D&D tournaments at like Gen Con in the 70s. And we can talk about what D&D tournaments mean a lot later, but it's wild. You basically had to try to beat the dungeon as fast as you can with as few kills as you could get. But he also made it as a player killer. As in, like, at the end of the module, it's like, hey, here's a whole pad full of PCs. Grab them. Use them, because you're going to go through them. Don't get too attached. They're all going to die. The Tomb of Horrors is this huge puzzle dungeon where, like, you step wrong, a building falls on you. You step wrong, you fall into a pit. You step wrong, Tarrasques come out the door. Whatever it is. It's like, it's just the most heinous set of traps and nonsense.
I'm familiar with 2 of them, I think. One was that, like, there's the main door, like, before you even go in, there's the main door. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm immediately suspicious of that. I'm going to look for another entrance. And it's like, oh, okay, there's this other, like, secret entrance, but you can't really see, like, it's really, really dark. Like, okay, fine. Well, I'm going to poke my head in the really, really dark thing. Okay, that was a sphere of annihilation, so you cease to exist.
Whoops.
And then the other one was a rectangular corridor that's marble on all 4 surfaces, like both walls and the floor and the ceiling. And if you go too far through the corridor, it turns out that, like, the entire thing is on a massive fulcrum, and it just, like, tips forward and you slide out the bottom into lava or something.
I believe it was acid, wasn't it?
Oh, probably acid.
Yeah, maybe there might have been 2 of them, right? One with acid, one with lava.
I mean, like,
why not?
In this place, everything you do, bad things happen to you. Like, you will go to a room, there'll be a statue, and then the statue will, if you go up and walk over there, the statue will come and just like crush you. Or there's 3 chests in a room, open one, and like a whole bunch of monsters come and eat you, dragons come out, or the place is beginning to collapse, and then you have a Metroid style run to get out. It's messed up. And they brought Asarak back a number of times, including in the Tomb of Annihilations, most recently in 5th edition, because sometimes you just need to remind players who the boss is. And it's weird because like 1st edition D&D had a much more hostile kind of relationship between the DM and the players. Like it used to be the referee, right? Like, and Gyjax come from the school of the dice fall where they may, and if they fall on you, too bad. And it was definitely, the game has become a lot more cooperative and nicer now, but it's cool to see a flashback to the days when the game hated you.
Yeah. Like my experience with the Tomb of Annihilation, or Tomb of Horrors, sorry, was a DM taking us through it basically like as a guided tour. Right?
Nice.
Being like, okay, you come to here, but like, this is the portal. You may want to interact with it. I'll stop you before you do, though, right? Like, I will allow you to do the thing where I suggest that it might be a good idea to take out your 10-foot pole here and see how much you shorten it by.
I love the idea of a guided tour of the Tomb of Horrors.
It was honestly quite clever because it is from a completely different era of playing D&D, right? Where you not only are you in an adversarial relationship with your players, but you are in an adversarial relationship with players who know the conventions of D&D.
Yes.
Right, and Tomb of Horrors was kind of designed to predate on that.
Yeah, it's really clever because it does things like it takes a lot of the knowledge that you understand about what it means to play the game. Like when you're adventuring correctly with like you've got your pole, you're tapping ahead, you're checking for secrets and traps, and it sits there and both uses those to your advantage and also to just ruin your forever.
Like basically, isn't there a trap that's essentially a bouncing Betty mine? Right? Like you're tapping the floor with your 10-foot pole to find like loose tiles, and it only activates on like the 3rd tap.
Yeah.
So you tap the tile and it's fine. You step on it, that's also fine.
Then your buddy steps on it.
The cleric gets blown in half, right? Like
Jesus.
No, but I mean, like, let me I have the module here, and like, here's one of them. Like, this room, charred remains, cinders, ashes, and charred bones and skulls, the crypts and blackened remains of clothing and gear, arms and armor, a thoroughly awful and frightening sight, encircle a huge glowing gem. If evil is detected, for the gem will send out pulses of wickedness and a strong aura of doom, so strong that detecting character will get the vague feeling that the magic is wish connected. The gem is a cursed wish magic item.
I take the gem.
It's a glowing orange one. It's a zirconium.
I take the gem.
And no matter what is desired by the character daring to touch it and wish, a reverse or perversion will bring doom to the character and all named in the wish. Immediately after causing the evil wish to transpire, the gem begins to pulse with reddish lights, growing progressively stronger, brighter, and hotter. Count to 10 as usual. The stone then explodes, absolutely killing any character within a 15-foot radius and sending waves of searing radiation and flames. The gem remains as a noisome mass of stinking, purplish mold which bubbles and chuckles. In 1 week, the mass will reform as a glowing orange gem.
How much do I sell the gem for? I sell the gem.
That's like the only way out of it. It's like you make a wish, it not only backfires the wish, but then also explodes.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's super good. And so I thought it was really clever that they also had the Demi-Lich itself as a creature, the mythic rare Demi-Lich. That's a 4 blue creature. Because when you look at that card, it's a floating skull with gems for teeth and eyes. And Demi-Lich, of course, is like what Asarak is. He's the Demi-Lich. It's a lich that has grown beyond the need for a body. It has gotten so enamored with knowledge and power that it basically just taken soul gems and replaced 8 pieces of its body with them, like its teeth and its eyes, and then the rest of its body just dissolves. And so to destroy it, you have to destroy all the gems and the skull, or it'll come back in 10 days afterwards. And it's just like inordinately difficult to destroy. So if you've ever played Diablo, and you know at the end of Diablo 1, you take that gem that's got Diablo in it and thrust it into your forehead, that is from this. That comes from the Demi-Lich. So I thought that was super cool, super neat, real good reference to like classic D&D. Another reference actually to classic D&D in terms of legends, one of the other ones that was super famous in this set that when we were previewing it, that a lot of people were like, what? And unless you were of an age, was of course The Hand in the Eye of Vecna, right? And the Book of Vile Darkness.
Yeah. So, because there's the Eye of Vecna and the Hand of Vecna and the Book of Vile Darkness that you mentioned. And if you have all three, then you get to make Vecna, which is a token, a legendary 8/8 black zombie god with indestructible and gains all triggered abilities of the book and the hand and the eye. But multiple times when we're playing Magic on stream, we've had people come in and into the chat being like, "Oh, shame there's no head of Vecna in the set," which is, you know, being like a coy joke, basically. Who's Vecna? What's up with this?
Okay, so give me 1 second here. I am going to pull something up because I actually told the story of Vecna a bit ago. One of the things I've been doing on my Twitter feed over time is I like to tell stories, and the stories this time around have been about some of the great legends of this set, because as an old school D&D player, this set is my absolute, like, everything I've wanted set. So first off, the Hand and the Eye of Vecna are like two of the most ancient like items in D&D. Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures from 1976, 1974 were the original origins of D&D, right? And then they came out with 3 supplements, Greyhawk, Blackmoor, and Eldritch Wizardry. So Eldritch Wizardry was one of the first real supplements to D&D, and in it had a host of magic items and a host of really cool just monsters and stuff. And in these monsters, there were things like, the Wand of Orcus, which shows up in the Commander set, but also the Hand and the Eye of Vecna, which is a dried, shriveled, and blackened hand that looks like it's been torched. And it's just sitting there, and you find this thing, and you're like, what is this crazy, obviously powerful piece of equipment? And if the hand is pressed against the stump of an arm, it first off fuses to your body and becomes part of it, and then gives you these incredibly powerful abilities to have. And it makes you, first off, totally evil, but it hides it because evil is emanating from the hand and not from you. So nobody knows that you've been immediately corrupted. But then you have all of these crazy powers that just let you do bananas things. Like, basically, it's so powerful that the DM guide says, put in the powers here that you want this ability to have. Like, the DM gets to decide what these things are, but it's like various magical powers and disintegration and just absurdly strong things. And now, the astute among you might be sitting there like, wait, I need to cut off my hand to put on the Hand of Vecna, but the other item is an eye. Do I need to? And yes, you do.
Of course you do.
Like, if you want to have the power, then you need to have the Eye of Vecna. And if you need the Eye of Vecna, well, unfortunately, you've only got 2 slots for eyes, buddy. So,
I mean, figure it out.
I'm just leaving it to your discretion, but yes.
Oh, could you imagine gouging out the wrong eye and then you've got like 2 left eyes and you just wind up with like migraines? Or as it turns out, like Vecna's eye has a slight astigmatism.
Right, I was just about to say, I'm like, oh no,
like,
you got to
needs a different prescription.
Yeah, you need the Coke bottles of Vecna to make sure you can see properly.
Well, I have ultimate power and I'm all seeing, but I also have glaucoma.
Well, you can't see anymore now, your eye being popped out.
But then you got Vecna's eye. You can't see through Vecna's eye?
You got cataract surgery.
Wait, so you lose depth perception? This hardly seems worth it.
So once placed, the eye can't be removed and turns the user unalterably chaotic. So now you're both evil from the hand and chaotic from the eye, because obviously you shoved a random eyeball into your head. But it also had just mega crazy, super powerful things. And again, it's another one of these like, fill in here. It lets you do crazy stuff like, shoot out disintegration rays or like, grab crazy powerful things. And what they hadn't done, though, they hadn't told you who Vecna is or what Vecna is originally. It was just the Hand and the Eye of Vecna. They're just super powerful items, right? And what happened was that Vecna becomes very famous. These items are super, super famous because they're incredibly powerful. They show up in the first edition D&D Player's Handbook, or in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They show up in second edition, and they start to give you a little bit more of like lore, where it's like, oh, Vecna was an ancient lich that became so powerful and was obliterated, and is just like, all that's left of him is his hand and his eye. But it turns out if you like put the hand and eye together, you get possessed by the spirit of Vecna, right? And suddenly he starts whispering to you in your head, starts giving you notions of what to do, starts changing the way you act. And like suggested powers include Death Ray, cause disease, animate dead, lightning bolt, time stop. Like, it's just insane. It's absolutely insane. And the hand is incredibly strong. It's got a 19 strength by itself. Like, it can grip you to dust. And then Vecna basically became such a hugely popular character that they turned him into a cult, a god. They made him into an archlich, then they made him into a god, then they made him into just like this spectral being that can go plane walking. They gave him a giant cult, a bunch of books, and it's just incredibly good. Like, the transition between second edition and third edition D&D was done by a multi-campaign setting crossing over module series called Die Vecna Die, which linked together Greyhawk, Ravenloft, and Planescape, and had the players chasing after Vecna through these different planes to like shatter, like to stop him from grabbing the power, stop his hand and eye from doing all these things, and to completely transition the entire universe into a brand new rule set.
So when the players were chasing this Archlich or whatever named Vecna, is that even actually a person is it its own being at this point, or is it just the most recent person who has put the hand and eye into them?
That's a really clever way to do it. But no, it's Vecna itself. The Lich is the original Vecna, sans eye and hand. Okay. Eventually gets it back, I guess. But yeah, it's just this old super Lich who's missing body parts, and if you find them and give them back to him, bad things happen. And it was really, really cool. And I love seeing that here in this game show, because that's like one of the legendary thing, like iconic moments of D&D, right next to like beholders and stuff. Now, you mentioned the head of Vecna back at the beginning of my story.
Yes.
The head of Vecna. Now, think about it. If you're looking at this, you've got the eye of Vecna, you've got the hand of Vecna. You have to like do horrific things to yourself to get the power of here. Now, the head of Vecna. Right? So this is an actual story with provenance, meaning we have the original letters that were written from the first party that did this. So in 1996, there was a game master named Mark Stewart who was running a split campaign where there were two different groups that were adversarial to each other. They were trying to beat each other to a quest. Group one plotted a trap for the second one. They seeded rumors of a mythical head of Vecna and found the head of a recently deceased enemy, set it up behind a bunch of magical traps that they created, and made it look like an ancient wizened artifact. Now, the first victim of this trap was actually from their own party, a druid who they hadn't told that they had set up a trap.
Oh, no.
And he went and he used his monster shaping abilities to summon apes to tear off his own head to try to get the head of Vecna.
Right, because of course, if you take off your hand, then the hand of Vecna works. If you take off the eye, then you can put the eye in. So clearly, the only way to get the power of the head of Vecna would be to take off your own head.
And then rumors of this like horrific event and this magical item showed up to Group 2, which is playing on a different night, a different day. They don't get to talk to each other about the game. They don't get to have any communication. So they go and they're exploring and they find the head. And so what do? Anything that any reasonable party would do. They decapitate the party wizard, and they sit there and try to stick the head of Vecna onto him. And they're like, wait, this didn't work, and Jim is dead. All right, John, I need you to come here because I think we did this wrong.
Oh, God.
And so they realize they made a mistake. They might have done it wrong. They probably messed up the ritual. That's what happened, right? This power must be here. So they killed a second party member, lopped his head off, and tried to shove the head of Vecna on it.
Yes.
And then they learned of the trap and were chastened, shall we say.
Like, even if it works, it's like, no, I don't want you to cut my head off and put off the head of Vecna, because then it's not me anymore. It's just Vecna. It's not me with Vecna's powers. It's just Vecna, and I'm dead. Don't cut my head off.
Man, I really love gamers sometimes. What a party of just absolute little pog champs. Right? Like, oh, that's so heartwarming as a GM who has had parties like this.
Can you imagine how much he must have felt just watching his parties lop their own heads off?
3 player characters. And I love that the druid summoned apes to tear his head off. That is
going the extra mile.
That is like the most gamer thing I've heard all day.
Now, here's the thing though. In the remaining members of the party looked and it's like, oh, this head had both eyes. It must not be the head of Vecna after all.
Could have worked that one out before you cut people's heads off, probably.
And that's when you sit there and go like, oh no. It is the greatest moment in GMing since the gazebo, right? Like it is truly one of the absolute, like that is like the legend is what it is. And then the GM basically goes and he writes this article into Steve Jackson Games' magazine. And they immediately publish it because they're like, this is the greatest story I've ever read. And it just is absolute gem. It's just one of the great like moments in DMing where you're like, you guys can't be this stupid. Oh, you are this stupid. Oh, this is going to be good.
That's amazing.
Oh, man.
I have a couple more that I want to ask you about because we've mentioned him a couple times, but tell me about Drizzt and why he have this cat and why he gets strong. Who is this guy?
Drizzt Do'Urden. Drizzt Do'Urden is one of, well, okay, so here's the thing. You might think Drizzt Do'Urden is the most famous D&D character of all time. And
I think I do think that, but I'm very prepared to be proven wrong.
The thing is, because I thought that too, because he is absolutely the most iconic. Him and like Raceland are probably like the two most iconic D&D characters ever. And it turns out, actually, WotC did market research, and their market research showed that Xanathar is actually more recognizable than Drizzt. And I was offended to my core.
Really?
Because it turns out that Drizzt hasn't had a lot of novels in a long time, and the art of like reading Forgotten Realms books is kind of like a lost one. But yeah, because Xanathar had like the D&D, like Xanathar's Guide to Everything or whatever had just come out.
Right.
And so everybody's like, oh, I know who Xanathar is. I'm like, how do you know who Xanathar is, but you don't know who Drizzt is? And I guess if you're just getting 5th edition books, then you're just going to know the dudes on the cover of the 5th edition books. And that just makes me sad. But my sadness aside, Drizzt is, though, still the most important D&D character of all time. He is so important that he changed the way an entire class worked so that they could make Drizzt legal. So let me explain who Drizzt Do'Urden, aka Drizzt Dermon Nashez Baron, the Drow Ranger of the Underdark, and who he is and why he matters, and why killing Icing Death and then equipping Drizzt with the weapon Icing Death is basically the best flavor win in the game.
All right.
So Drizzt is a drow. Let's start with drow are underground elves. They're bright purple, or like not bright purple, they're like dark purple to blackish colored. They have a bunch of abilities like fairy fire where they can line bodies and random things. They've got infravision. And originally they were designed to be the evil elves. Like high elves and wood elves have they're above ground, they're normal Tolkien elves, and then we have these underground evil elves. Now, evil elves were one of the big mega like kind of enemies of the early days of D&D, right? Like I was talking about the LOL quest in the when we were talking about the Hall of the Giant Kings or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the things you do is you go into the Underdark, and when you're down there, you find the drow, and the drow are these absolutely evil, like cool elves that like, you know, worship this crazy spider demon goddess, and they ride these half elf, half spiders called Driders. And it's just horrifying, and they're super cool. But in the Forgotten Realms, okay, so in the 80s, they were doing novels for D&D. They were doing Dragonlance novels, they were doing Greyhawk novels, and they were doing Forgotten Realms novels. And R.A. Salvatore, who is one of the legendary authors there, found this character Drizzt and decided, okay, you know what? I want to tell a story of drow. But if everybody's a villain, you don't really have a lot to talk about, right? So they had this Icewind Dale series that came out, which was about Wolfgar and Caddy Bree and Brunor Battlehammer, all these other characters who become NPCs and very famous characters, D&D, and are set here. And amongst them, they find, while they're adventuring, they find this drow out there who is out there wandering the world. Like he's exiled from the Underdark, and he's got these twin swords. And everybody's just like, wait, drow are evil. But no, Drizzt is cool. He can't be evil. He's awesome. And what comes to pass is that Drizzt was like, you know, always a kind of a good to neutral-ish elf, not an evil elf. And he caused his house to lose the favor of Lolth, the queen of the drow and queen of them. And his father got sacrificed. And because of that, Drizzt had to basically run away. And he ends up on the top, and he's exploring and going around. And he becomes like, you know, friends with all these people up in Icewind Dale, the dwarf Brunor Battlehammer and his adopted daughter, the human Caddy Bree. And they become like, Drizzt is chased to Icewind Dale by a hunter named Roddy McGristle, which is the least D&D name of all time. Roddy McGristle.
Roddy McGristle. That sounds like
that sounds like a wrestler's name.
it sounds like something from MST3K's Space Mutiny episode.
Right?
Rick Hard Slab, Gristle McThornbody. Like that's actually one of the names from the thing is Gristle McThornbody.
Yeah. So it's real, like it's funny. Like those novels vacillate between like hard D&D names and then just complete garbage. And so basically Drist is out here and he gains the trust of these people and they're like, okay, well, we'll take you in. And they become friends with, the halfling Regis and Wolfgar, the human barbarian. They go and save Icewind Dale and they do all these crazy things. And Drist becomes this gigantic hero. And his books are awesome. And it's literally just, if you look at like a Dragon Ball Z episode, and I'm talking like one of the mid-filler episodes where Goku is just obliterating millions of random beings, that's kind of what a Drist novel feels like, or like Dynasty Warriors, where it's just like a dude with two swords just blendering through orcs. That's kind of what these stories feel like. They're not high art, but they're delightful. Sometimes you want a fun summer read, and that's what these books really give you. So what is the gimmick here of Drist? Why is he this character in the game, right? Like when you look at Drist in the game here, it's this green and blue, I wish he was blue, green and white character with double strike, and he summons this creature named Guinevere, a legendary 4/1 panther with trample, right? So first off, why is he green and white? Well, he's green because he's kind of wild and he's like naturist and he's a ranger. He's white because he's given up the chaotic ways of like Lolth and the Drow. He's trying to reform himself, be more lawful, be more into people and protecting people. But also, if you ever look at the iconic image of Drist out there, it's this purple elf with a shock of white hair and a green and white cloak. And if I was going to pick blindly the colors to represent Drist, it would be green and white because those are the colors that he wears. So it just ended up being a real coincidence that you can magically make it fit in the color pie, but also just be what you would expect Drist Duerden to look like.
And I assume he's got double strike on account of two swords.
Two swords. Icingdale and Twinkle are the two swords that he's got. And here's the thing, rangers used to be like bowmen and like, archers, people out there doing wild hunty things and like with maybe their pet wolf or, trackers and stuff. But Drist here is a ranger, he's a tracker, but he's running around with two scimitars that are magical and amazing. And players wanted two scimitars that were magical and amazing. And D&D didn't really have the mechanism outside of fighters being able to use like two weapon combat. So literally, they remade the ranger class to make Drist able to be a ranger. So when you look at 3rd edition D&D, one of the big things that changed is that suddenly rangers can be archers and super archers, or they can be two weapon fighters, a thing that had not existed anywhere else. Was suddenly like, where did this come from? This was not in any of the lore or anything. Oh gosh, I guess it means that Drist is a ranger now. It was like, it's one of the few times in D&D that the game has forever basically just changed completely because a character was so cool that everybody demanded it. And it's rad, it's wild. Like Drist basically became iconic. He's also like the character everybody loves to hate. Like, because he's just so ubiquitous and so powerful and so like Mary Sue indestructible. Yeah, it's like, of course he's going to destroy 10,000 ogres. He's Drist, ha ha ha.
He seems to have that 1990s very like cool, edgy kind of feel, right? It's like I'm cast out from the evil people.
He is exactly every trope of edgy, like try hard grindcore character you're gonna find. He's like too cool for school. His whole pose is very much like I'm too beautiful to live.
I'm so beautiful and brooding, and my people cast me out, but I have two swords and a big cat.
Right, and like Caddy Bree's in love with him, but I cannot allow her to love me because I'm too evil and unlovable. It's all of the 90s tropes of pure edgelord, and it's real annoying. But at the same time, he's just like, everybody is 12 once, right? And when you're 12, some things are cool. Sometimes that's Drist with two swords. Sometimes that's Sarkin with two fire-breathing dragons attached to his arms. Like, you just accept it, and you like, okay, this is rad. We're just going to accept it for being rad and move on with our lives, right? But it's rad. So like Guinevere, though. Guinevere is really cool. She is this, or he, I don't remember if it's he or she, it's like a giant panther thing. What it is, he's got this figurine of wondrous power, which is a magical item that's shaped like a panther. and it summons his. And when he uses it, it summons Guinevere. And so Guinevere is this gigantic panther that runs around because, of course, why wouldn't your two-sword brooding hero have a panther? Which is also like hella 90s. And it's just really cool. It's like the Figurines of Wondrous Power, which you also see the item Ebony Fly show up is one of those. That's a Figurine of Wondrous Power. They show up for 12 hours and they do things with you. They can attack with you. They can like fight and whatever. And then they go back to the astral plane and wait to be summoned again. So Guinevere is such a fundamental part of his character that it would be like having a Tulsimir Wolfblood without having his wolf.
Right, which, of course, can't do that.
No, how could you?
Oh, yeah, Ebony Fly. Sorry, I hadn't actually seen this. Ebony Fly is in the Commander decks. It's a 2-mana artifact, enters tapped, taps to add colorless, and then for 4 mana, roll a d6. Until end of turn, you may have Ebony Fly become an XX insect artifact creature with flying, where X is the result. And whenever Ebony Fly attacks, another target attacking creature gains flying until end of turn.
Yep. And so Guinevere was one of the other Figurines of Wondrous Power that does a very similar function.
Cool.
Yeah, so it was like, it's really neat to see kind of these callbacks to legends of the great era. So like when you look there, you've got Brunor, you've got Catti-brie, you've got Wulfgar. These are all characters from his story. So among them is the legendary dragon Icing Death. Icing Death is a big white dragon, and it's this crazy, like super powerful, just like, demon monster, like not demon monster, just super powerful dragon. Drizzt, amongst one of his quests, goes and fights against him, kills Icing Death, takes, like, let me get this exact because this is actually really, it's very much of the era. Just a moment, I just need to pull up that reference. I've got like so many tabs open right now. It's like tabs and my desk is covered in books. And I mean, I love this stuff. I live for this stuff. I apologize for just monopolizing your conversation.
No, you're fine. That's why you're here.
Yeah, so Icing Death. Icing Death was a +3 scimitar, which is the treasure pile of this dragon, Ingelokistamizilian, better known as Icing Death, because who is going to remember that? And so Icing Death, when you get killed, one of the trophies that they got was this scimitar that Drizzt ended up using, and it's a frost weapon that like slows people down. It absorbs heat and fire, and it's just such a really, really cool, like cool and cold weapon. And when you look at Icing Death itself, the Frost Tyrant, the weapon itself taps target creature defending player controls to represent kind of that frost breath. So that I
Nice.
thought was a really neat way to depict this weapon.
That's good.
I'm just sad that we didn't get Twinkle, which is Drizzt's other weapon, but it makes sense because like Twinkle's story is not really clever. It's just a sword he got.
It's just a sword. I call it Twinkle. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Like it makes sense. Like, look, you can't be all edgelord all the time. It was like forged by ancient elves and he found it from Artemis and Terry and then like, et cetera, et cetera. But it didn't, like when I was talking to James Wyatt, I was like, why did you include Icing Death but not Twinkle? And he's like, do you know the origin story of Twinkle? And I'm like, no. He's like, exactly. And I'm like, yeah, we all remember Icing Death, but nobody remembers Twinkle. So poor Drizzt is double strikey, but only gets one sword. Alas.
So, speaking of characters, when you're at a certain age and some characters are just cool, I was not familiar with sort of that level of lore of D&D. I was sort of vaguely aware of Drizzt, but I'd never read any of the books or whatever, and I didn't know much about him. So, I've come much more recently to my knowledge of the character. But my friends and I did play a lot of Baldur's Gate.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, and the character that we all thought was super cool was Minsk.
Yes. Go for the eyes, boo.
Exactly. Minsk was a party member in the original Baldur's Gate video game. He was just one of the people that you could have in your party, and he had this big, like, sort of purple, I don't know if it was a tattoo or if it was, like paint, like a big purple symbol on his face and forehead, and in his avatar he's holding a hamster. And if I recall correctly, in the game, he actually has an item slot dedicated to this hamster that you can't remove.
Yep.
And if you sort of question him about it, he refers to this hamster, whose name is Boo, as a miniature giant space hamster.
Yes.
So the implication being that there is a race of giant hamsters that live in space, which I love, because it's like, that means that in D&D they have a concept of outer space.
Oh yeah, like in that one phrase, there's the entire universe.
Yeah, and that Boo is a unusually miniature version of them, to the point that it's just the size of a hamster that we would have on Earth, and he frequently in the voice lines, the most famous one, of course, which is the flavor text on the Boo token is, go Boo, go for the eyes. And so yeah, Minsk is, he enters the battlefield, he makes a 1/1 hamster, and then Boo can get you can make Boo, or any creature, but you can make Boo enormous. I love it.
Yeah. Minsk is like, okay, so when they were making this set, I was talking to James about this because like I'm very curious. And I was like, yeah, of course you're gonna have Drist in the set. You're gonna have like, all these random like Tiamats and Bahamut's and like Asmodeus and Orcus and all these things. And he was like, and I was like, why would you put Minsk in there? I mean, I know why, because Minsk is, for people like you and me, one of the most iconic characters in all of D&D. And he was like, when we were designing this set inside of Wizard itself, they're like, oh, awesome. That means Minsk is going to be there, right? And they had to. They basically were forced by popular demand to put Minsk and Boo in there. The moment they announced that they were doing a Forgotten Realms set, some of my friends at Wizard were saying, like, from the second we announced it, the first thing we heard was, Minsk is going to be there, right? Minsk and Boo is going to be there, right? You're not doing this without them, right?
Well, probably because a lot of the people who work at D&D or who work at Wizards of the Coast are people, of about our age who would have played Baldur's Gate.
Right? Yeah, and it's like, how could you not have one of the most famous, like, one of their mandates for this set was to make sure that they could reference every possible place a person could remember D&D, going from novels to games to video games to tabletop, all the different editions. So that's why you have things like you had mentioned last week, Eye of the Beholder, which is the most famous SSI gold box game that was out in the early 80s, in the mid 80s. That was one of the famous Forgotten Realms D&D role-playing games. And that's why we have Minsk, who is one of my favorite stories to share. So, do you know what a giant space hamster is?
I mean, the thing is, it was never necessarily, to my knowledge, it was never necessarily explained in the game, and we just assumed that this is what Minsk believed, and that he was maybe not the brightest bulb. But I should say, everyone loved Minsk not just because of Boo, but because he just sounded so like affable and gregarious and fundamentally good. He always had your back. He was a good character. He was a nice guy, and he had his little hamster. So it's like everyone loved Minsk.
Yeah, basically, it's like if Minsk wants to say that his hamster's a space hamster, who am I to say no? He's such a beloved, like he's such a kind, affable. I mean, you're right. He was like endearing. He's like just, always wants to do the right thing type of guy. And everybody's like, yeah, if he wants his hamster to be a space hamster, well, it doesn't hurt anybody. Let him have it. But giant space hamster, though, and the first hamster in all of D&D is like one of my favorite just things to think about. So if we go back to the beginning of D&D, and I'm not going to do this whole story. I've told this story on my Twitter feed. If you guys go look it up, it'll be a very, very, very long thread that goes through the entire history of Dungeons and Dragons. But the meat of it is that in the 80s, when they were looking for ways to unify the different campaign settings, you had like Earth, which is the Greyhawk setting. You had Toril for Forgotten Realms. You had Kryn for Dragonlance. Dark Sun was there, and all these other like Mystara, everything else. And players wanted, like DMs wanted to use different modules from different settings. Players wanted to check out these other worlds and find ways to go across. So they tried to figure out, okay, well, what are good settings we can do? Like, what are cool ways we can bring people from one setting to another? I mean, you had things like planar travel, but in first and second edition, that was kind of downplayed a bit because of like the whole devil scare. And they were like, oh, if you're going through hell and heaven and talking to like Asmodeus, the literal devil, to try to get to the other side, we don't want these angry moms to come after us. So we can't really emphasize that. That's why Planescape didn't really show up until like the 90s. But Jeff Grubb, the designer, who is one of my favorite designers of all time. Also, the guy who wrote the story that gave us Felden for Magic the Gathering and wrote a bunch of the Ice Age novels and stuff like that. He was one of the designers trying to figure out this problem. And so he reached back to the history of pulp novels and went back to like, Robinson Crusoe and like the pirates and all the old swashbuckly types and was like, what would be cool if we had swashbucklers in space? So he created this notion of spelljammers, which were these big, giant, like, Napoleonic era ships that are going around between these things called crystal spheres, which is what they call the different plane. Like the crystal sphere of Kryn, for instance, has the planet Kryn, the 3 moons, the different planets, the constellations, and it's its own self-contained universe floating within the sea of the ancient Greek idea of phlogiston, which is this flammable gas thing that just is the entirety of space before they understood the concept of void, right? So when you go there and you're like, okay, well, you can create these ships that are run by magic users and wizards that will then act as like pirate ships and look like pirate ships that go between the islands of the planets in the giant sea of Phlogiston. And it was like, really, really cool. Like he
That's
made
awesome.
Illithids into the big bad guys. They were like, obviously we've seen it, mind flayers in the set. They're giant like squid headed demons who can control minds, and their ships look like nautilids, like going around. And the Githyanki and Githzerai were there from like the planescape things of just these like extra planar kind of like demon elf type things. And there was also the race of the Gif, which were the giant hippos that dressed up like they were coming out of, Master and Commander, or like, some sort of like what ho, knave, knights and like Napoleonic era, like cigar smoking, monocle wearing hippos with blunderbusses, who are the greatest characters in the history of D&D.
I'm looking at some of this on the Forgotten Realms Wikia page, and one of the like Mind Flayer space pirate captains, just because of the fact that they dress like a pirate but are a Mind Flayer, they just look like Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Or Davy Jones looks like a Spelljammer pilot.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The other thing was the article for Spelljammers. It's like, here's what a Spelljammer looks like. And it just looks like the Weatherlight.
It is exactly that.
Yeah.
The Weatherlight is 100% a Spelljammer.
Yeah.
Because what's it do? It's a big pirate ship that goes between planes.
Interesting.
Yeah, fancy that. And if you think about when it came out versus when Spelljammer came, I'm just saying.
I mean, we talked a lot last episode about how D&D and Magic have, we'll say, borrowed heavily from one another for years before this set.
You remember that Magic the Gathering was created because Peter Atkinson wanted something that they could play quickly between rounds of D&D.
Right?
So that's why Magic exists. So yeah, Magic and D&D are symbiotic in that, like, when you look at those first sets, you got Fireball, Lightning Bolt, Mind Twist, all these things that are just very like the bad guys are orcs and ogres and giants, elves. All these things come straight out of D&D. Straight out of D&D. There's not even there's no hiding at all there. And it was funny because in that era, those of us who were hardcore D&D fans versus those of us who were hardcore Magic fans hated each other and would have giant flame wars in message boards and news groups and chat rooms about dice chuckers versus card floppers. And it was this crazy chaotic thing until you realize these are the same thing. Like, the reason I got into Magic at all is because when I was in seventh grade in my band class, I heard people in the back of the class saying, okay, I'm going to cast Fireball at your dragon. And I was like, they're playing D&D. And I go there and it's like, no, it's Fireball and Shivan Dragon. They're playing Magic. I'm like, this looks like D&D, but with cards. I need to know this. And it's literally like when they were just so adamant of never crossing the streams, it was just seemed so silly to me. Like, why would you? These games were made to go together. They're perfect together. But yeah, so Spelljammer. Spelljammer gives us these things, mages going around, and they're like, okay, yeah, but we want something from Dragonlance, and Dragonlance hates extraplanar travel and doesn't want anything to do with this. What can we do? Well, Dragonlance has this race. So gnomes in D&D used to be just small, illusionist David the Gnome types that would talk to burrowing forest animals and cast minor illusions and do a lot of garbage, and they were totally useless, wasted class and wasted race. And when Dragonlance was created, Tracy Hickman was like, I don't want those gnomes, I want better gnomes. And Jeff Grubb was like, well, what about engineers? Because he used to be an engineer. And he was like, frazzled engineers that always build things that break. And that was a really cool idea. Like, just completely overwrought, like, tinkers, right? And that became such a popular idea that those gnomes then became like pop culture's gnomes. Like, when you look at WoW, when you look at other video games, gnomes are always now the little engineer types who are building things, because that came straight from Dragonlance, because nobody wants gnomes to talk to badgers. So so Jeff Grubb is sitting there like, okay, well, I need something from Dragonlance. What from Dragonlance will work? Gnomes are cool, and they were the type of people who would build weird space things. Okay, let's do that. But wait, gnomes, because of second edition rules of D&D, can't be magic users in Dragonlance. I mean, they could have been illusionists, but illusionists can't control spelljamming helms. How do we do this? Well, they're engineers. If I was going to over-engineer a spaceship, what would it look like? Well, maybe it would have a big giant like wheel, like sort of like a ferry that goes up and down, a ferry boat on a river, right? Okay, well, how would we pilot this wheel? Okay, let's take a bunch of gnomes and have them run in the thing. Okay, well, they tried that, but then the gnomes would keep falling out, or they would fall out of sync and get crushed by the gears. That doesn't seem a good idea. Okay, well, what else can we do? What else runs in wheels? hey, my kid's rodent runs in a wheel round and round and round forever. What if we just took that and super saiyaned it and tried to figure out a way to make that into something that runs in wheels? So the gnomes go and they breed a race of gigantic, sapient hamsters that are the size of bears that can then run in a circle for a very long time without rest or without needing food or a lot of maintenance. And they're like, all right, now we take this and we gear it up and we put it in this giant wheel, tie it up with the rubber bands that attach to the gears and the crankshaft and the tinker thing. And suddenly they've got a gigantic spacefaring riverboat run by hamsters.
Just A to B to C, it all makes sense. Every step on that journey was the right step at the time with the information we had. Yet,
Yet.
here we are.
But we started at what if we could swashbuckle in D&D, and we ended at giant space hamsters.
Right.
As a logical progression.
Was any part of my story incongruous? No. Every step went one step after the other into gigantic ferry boats driven by gnomes with hamsters.
It was like a Socratic dialogue, right? You can just imagine, like, between each one of those arguments, there would be somebody saying, and certainly you must then agree that, right? It's like, well, yes, clearly.
Yes, and what if they were hamsters?
Well, obviously.
So with these giant space hamsters that we got, we end up with these guys are now being able to go around the entire, phlogiston universe, go between all the different planes with these giant hamsters. And they can also spread this food source around called spaham, which is space hamster meat that's served in cans.
Spaham.
Spaham. I'm not even kidding. When I was a kid, I called the space hamsters the harnessed astronomical mammalian semi-sentient transportation enabling rodents, aka the hamsters for short.
Obviously, yes.
So eventually, TSR decided that space pirates floating through glop with giant hamsters and British hippos being chased by angry squid men, and it was maybe a bridge too far. And it lacked a centralized hub for PCs to congregate. So they created Planescape, they created Sigil, and they shelved the jams and were like, yeah, we will get back to you the day after never. Good luck with that. But the thing about Forgotten Realms, and the reason Forgotten Realms is the default D&D setting, is that Forgotten Realms is a place where everything comes in and nothing leaves. It is like Commander in that sense, where once something has been introduced to the realms, we're here, buddy. We've got giant gnomes with space hamsters. That's the game we're playing. There is space in the Forgotten Realms. There is realm space with different planets you can spell jam to meet different monsters and things. And so you've got these giant space hamsters. So the BioWare designer, James Olhan, who was running a Forgotten Realms campaign when he was working at BioWare initially, they had a character who was a mentally unstable ranger with a pet hamster named Boo. And when he was given the task to create this D&D version of Forgotten Realms and translate second edition, well, of course he's going to put his NPCs into the game. Why wouldn't you? You're the DM. So suddenly, Minsk and Boo are now inserted into Baldur's Gate and become like the most iconically beloved characters in D&D.
So giant space hamsters were a thing before Baldur's Gate.
Yes. Miniature giant space hamsters were also a thing. They were a mutant variant of the space hamster that would once in a while during breeding programs just show up and you'd be like, oh, darn. Looks like we got a regressive. And you would just end up with miniature giant space hamsters.
So this is seriously like someone from the dev team on Baldur's Gate going, oh, you know what would be great?
Yes.
The one person that knows all about spell jammers and the space hamsters and all that is like, okay, I got a great idea. And everyone else is like, all right, sure, go for it.
And it's just one of those things where it's like when you're in realms, when you're in Faerun and you're adventuring, and you know what a hamster is. And if some weirdo comes up and is like, this is my giant space hamster, you're like, all right, buddy, if you want it to be a giant space, like you don't know about, the average person doesn't know about space. They don't know about hamsters and gnomes with fairy wheels and all this. They're just like, I will take it on faith, whatever you want. And of course, the fact that his combat is, Minsk throwing Boo at the enemy. It's like, go for the eyes, Boo, the eyes. And when they showed up, it made me so happy. It's so good. And this card is so good. It's like perfectly designed, right? Like you make Minsk, he brings in Boo, and then you can make Boo pump your mana and he becomes a gigantic giant type in addition to his other types. So he becomes a giant hamster. I love it. I love it.
It's so good.
It's so perfect. This set was a home run from top to bottom, and even the misses like the Tarrasque, like the legendary Tarrasque, which everybody has been complaining about, right? Because in D&D, when the Tarrasque is first introduced, it is a statless, gigantic monster. Tarrasques come from ancient French mythology, and that's why it's got all the extra letters and Q's and stuff in it. But the Tarrasque is there. It's a gigantic monster that comes in, and when the Tarrasque shows up, everything is dead. Don't even bother. Just roll a new character. Game is over, right?
Right.
But they made the mistake in D&D of, well, it exists. Players want stats so they can try to fight it. So how do we give stats to this? And one of the problems in D&D is the second you give something a name, then you have taken away its mystique and mystery. Right. Like sometimes you want it. Tolkien had this idea of the castle on the hill, which is when you're adventuring, when you're sending Frodo and Samwise and everybody out to the distance, and they look over the hill and there's a castle out there. You don't tell them what's in the castle. You don't tell them what's in the rocks of the castle. You leave it to the reader to sit there and decide what that castle is and build their own world inside their head. If you over-explain things, then suddenly things start to suck because they're never going to be as crazy as what you imagined. So when the Tarrasque shows up in rules and they're like, oh, it's a monster in the monster manual now, it's got stats. Well, the stats are like, okay, they're super strong. It's very powerful. It's got good AC, but that's not like the world-rending beast that it was in the module when it showed up. And every subsequent edition of D&D that the Tarrasque has showed up in, the thing has gotten worse, easier to beat, just like a monster. And so like when the Tarrasque showed up in Forgotten Realms, you're like, yeah, I've got the mystique of the Tarrasque in my head. What the hell? This thing's just a 10/10. It doesn't even have trample and it's got ward. What is this garbage? You know what that is? That is the perfect representation of a D&D Tarrasque. That is exactly what the Tarrasque is. It is, you think it is something, then you see the stats and are disappointed. 100% correct.
I will never forget the time that Third Ed came out and we were sitting around looking at it, and a friend opened the monster manual, read the Tarrasque, and was like, okay, I wish the Tarrasque fails its next save. I cast Power Word Kill.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, the Tarrasque shouldn't have saving throws.
I think that was the strat. That was going to be like his strategy. Should we encounter the Tarrasque?
Wow.
Because by the time you get to Tarrasque, you can cast things like, 9th level spells at will. And that just sucks. Like, why? Why would you want something? Why would you even put hit points on something that's meant to just be the game-ending Godzilla that shows up?
Right, exactly. Like, I mean, I think of in the old West End game, Star Wars RPG, they just said, here's the Star Destroyer. For the sake of argument, these are what kind of weapons it has. And if your players ever try to fight one, they die.
Yes.
Right? If they ever like get in their ship and are like, we need to take on the Star Destroyer, give them a nice little round of applause and tell them they're dead, right? It's got like a wing of TIE fighters and like all this. It's not possible. Or like in Shadowrun with the Immortal Elves, where they say, like, if you ever encounter Harlequin or if your players ever encounter Harlequin, just toss some dice behind the screen and tell them that they die.
Basically.
Right? If they piss him off, right? Or Harlequin, like, these are not things that players are meant to interact with mechanically. They are beyond the player's capacity to deal with. That is okay.
Like, realistically, a Tarrasque should have been like, Emrakul or something, or like Ulamog, just this indestructible, gigantic monster. But you can't do that because, like, you've already put stats to it. It's got a card. Like, you can't just create, like, I mean, it'll unbalance the game if you create the Tarrasque what it is. So making the Tarrasque kind of just suck, I think, is fitting with what the Tarrasque is. It's disappointing, but it's also like, it's a Tarrasque. It's like when in D&D first edition, they created this manual called Deities and Demigods, which took all these like pantheons and things and gave stats to them. And the problem with D&D is when you give stats to something, players will want to go and kill it. And so you got all these players going and hunting down gods and stuff and just trying to kill it. And of course, in that book, they put the Hindu pantheon and they put like the Chinese pantheon, like pantheons that are still existent and used, but they're just not used by the Midwestern Christians who wrote D&D. So it was like, all right, we can put stats to these. And it's like, oh, guys, don't do that. But yeah, like, it's like Cthulhu. You're not supposed to fight Cthulhu. Cthulhu shows up, game is over. Tarrasque shows up, game is over. If Emrakul shows up, the game is over. So I don't know. I thought it was neat to see them create the disappointing nature of finding the Tarrasque and seeing stats on it. Good job with that.
Definitely seems like one of those no-win situations.
Oh yeah, there's no
like
way.
If you don't want to put Tarrasque on a card, then it's just not in the set. And everyone's like, but what about the Tarrasque?
You know what I would have done? I would have made a sorcery that's called something like, Shadow of the Tarrasque or something that just exiles all creatures in play.
Ooh.
Like a wrath, right?
Ooh, that's quite elegant. I like that.
Like, it's the Tarrasque. There it is. By the way, you're all dead.
This sect could use a wrath.
Boy, howdy.
Use a cleanup.
So I wanted to end with Volo, Guide to Monsters. Volo, the anti-tribal tribal card that is like so perfectly designed. Because first off, the Volo is like this NPC that they've had in D&D, or not in D&D, in Forgotten Realms proper for 1,000 million years. And namely as just this narrator that shows up in these books that they print out. So like in the olden days.
And just to interject briefly, the book is Volo's Guide to Monsters.
Yeah.
So the card name is Volo, Guide to Monsters, which I appreciate.
I appreciated that a lot. But yeah, like, so basically what Volo is again, created by Jeff Grubb, a name that shows up once again, is one of the most like long-lived characters in the Forgotten Realms. Because what happened is in the early 80s, let's say 1983 or 4 or something like that, there was a guide called the Volo's Guide to Everything or All Things Magical, which is basically a source book. It's a source book with a whole ton of cool magic items. And Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, would use all these Volo's guides to create lore for Forgotten Realms. So he created Volo's Guide to the Baldur's Gate, Volo's Guide to the Sword Coast, the Cormyr, the Dale Lands, etc., Waterdeep. And all of these things are just like flavor. They're just the creator of the setting wants to give you his notes so that you can go and take them to your games and have culture and flavor and stuff in your games. So it was super cool, and making him into like the guide to monsters that he gets bonuses and draws cards when you see a different monster that you haven't seen before, or you copy it in something because he's writing it into his book. He's copying the monster he sees into his little book to tell you about later. I loved it. I thought it was so clever. Yeah.
That's great.
Volo Thamp Getarm is like, he's just like the NPC of choice. He's like, you never run into him in games. He's just the guy who writes the books. And I love that. I love that meta tale. He's not Marco Volo, though, because Marco Volo is different. Because, of course, there's a guy named Marco Volo. Why wouldn't there be, right? Yeah, so that is Volo, the great adventurer. Him and, like, Xanathar, who's taken over kind of that spot as writing just lore books. It felt like they took this series of legends and creatures and stuff, and they wanted to try to link it up to the books you would see in stores, which is why you have Xanathar the Kingpin, Volo Guide to Monsters, which is why Ellie Wick is going to be showing up in a novel soon. Or not a novel, a module. That's why you have like, Orcus and Asmodeus as big bads. And I don't know. I thought it was wonderful. I thought they did a fantastic job with this. It's weird that they put Mordenkainen in, because Mordenkainen is Gary Gygax's PC from the olden days. And he is a planeswalker. He shows up on Toril sometimes, but he's more famous for being on Greyhawk than in Forgotten Realms. But like, they already kind of had a representative of Ed Greenwood in Volo, and giving his Mary Sue Elminster into the set is kind of like, I guess.
Assume that that's as close as they can get with making the dog. I just assume that's as close as they can get to referencing the Dead Alewives sketch of, no, I already specifically said when you asked me that I cast Mordenkaiden's faithful watchdog. I can't see anything else in here that's a more, there's no ogre slaying knife.
There's no Mountain Dew. There's no Cheetos.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, Mordenkainen. I'm so glad that they put his dog in there, and Mordenkainen's polymorph. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is not the choice I would have made for like legendary spells. I would have wanted something like Biggie's Hand or something like that. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, we got Magic Missile.
We got Magic Missile. We got Burning Hands. Like, you got the Hand of Vecna.
I didn't even mention this last episode actually, but that Dead Alewives D&D sketch,
so good.
We found later, a couple years after hearing it for the first time, that the Dead Alewives did like a sequel sketch to it, and in that one you find out that two of the group members are named Graham and Jeremy. Which Jeremy and I were like, well, what?
That's awesome.
Are these people us? So anyway, that is, I think, going to have to do it for this episode of Tap Tap, but I've had a blast with it. Shivam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this. I could talk about this all day.
Oh, yeah.
And I apologize to the listeners if I didn't get to your favorite character. I'm sure they're wonderful.
If there's something more that you'd like to hear about D&D and relating to AFR, let us know in the comments on the YouTube version of the video, and Perhaps we will do a third installment of this at some point. But in the meantime, Shivam, where can folks find your podcast?
Well, you can find my podcast, Casual Magic, anywhere the podcasts are, except for YouTube, because I'm too lazy to put it up there, and I really ought to change that. Or you can find me at Gearupuri Gears on Twitter. I'm on the Commander Advisory Group, and I'm on Twitter all the time, and I will happily talk to you about whatever you want to talk about.
All right. And that podcast is Casual Magic with Shivam.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before I sign off, a reminder that this podcast is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. And of course, our friends at Card Kingdom. Check out cardkingdom.com/LRR. Until next time, I have been Graham, joined by Cameron.
Hello.
And our special guest, Shivam.
Thank you.
James was running the card reader. Jordan edits these. Heather gets them online. And thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.